1990s. We have an ample history, the lynching in Susanna Moody's Roughing It in the Bush. We have a long history in Canada of thinking about the ways in which hate speech and language and attitude conditions a sensibility in this nation. So there's a way in which we very quickly moved to the US as a way of kind of distancing a certain kind of Canadiana from these questions, when these questions in particular are questions that have animated human culture for the last 500 years.
Richard Woodson.
Yeah, I mean, my reference to the states was really to say the legal resolution, because there are sort of an increasingly large group of individuals who are kind of advocating that that's the appropriate legal response here, as opposed to the reality. Of course, we have a significant history of kind of racism and all these manifestations. I want to pick up on something you said before, and again, I don't want to go back too much to the states, but again, I can, instead of referring to the states, it can be those advocates within Canada who increasingly think we ought to adopt that more libertarian approach. And that is, and I think this picks up on something you said too, and that is the way in which sometimes the defense of hate speech as a matter of free speech, which is premised on the integrity of public discourse and democratic legitimacy, is a distraction from much more fundamental issues about free speech, and that is really the meaningful opportunity people have to participate. I mean, we live in a world where most people have a very limited opportunity to effectively communicate in that public discourse. And to spend all your time talking about, gee, we got to protect hate speech no matter how much we may despise it, takes all the attention away from the incredible inequity in people's meaningful communicative power. And that seems to me the most fundamental free speech issue there is today.
Janet.
And I think that fairness issue, the question of fair access to communication, is a really, really important one. But I fail to see how for the downtrodden and the less empowered and the less affluent, restricting speech is a help. I mean, if you're wealthy, you don't need free speech. You get to buy whatever you want. I go back to my concern and my belief, actually, that free speech, the ability to express your grievance, has been a necessary component of struggles for social justice.
Let me follow up on that, Janet. Let me follow up on that because the women whom I think you're referencing, in their use of free speech to promote what they saw as long overdue rights, weren't uttering hateful things. They were just arguing for their rights.
Oh, I think we misremember history. I really do think we misremember history. I remember during the years of greater tumult about access to abortion, and there were virulent criticisms of the pro-choice side's use of photographs of women bleeding to death in back alleys. Really gross pictures. I had to explain this to my daughters, because they're coming to me with all these concerns about the pro-life campaigns using the gross pictures.
So this is the free speech you'd be referring to in that case?
Exactly.
Which could be interpreted as hate speech.
And the people who tried to shut suffragettes down, excuse me, I've got a bit of the flu, so I'm a little bit out of it, suffragettes down, because what they were saying about women's right to freely participate was heinous. It was a misdescription of God's will or the natural order of the world. I mean, there's all sorts of things that were used as arguments to try to shut people down through history when they've asked for a change to the status quo.
Susan, let me follow up on something that you said right near the beginning of your first answer, and I want to make sure I heard it right because I wasn't sure I got it, where you said you were somewhat on side with the usefulness of hate speech laws because they give people the right to speak out. Mm-hmm. Okay, that sounds the opposite of the intention of the thing. Because some people would say...
I'm talking about the people who are targeted to express themselves. And that was why I was so interested in the hate speech argument against the Toronto Star and Snuff, was because I wanted us in court, on the public record, to talk about why we thought their ad, one of the most powerful media, we're hardly shutting down the minority here, one of the most powerful media groups in the city, how their ad spoke to us and silenced us. And that's what I mean. And that I think that through court, and that's why I think laws, and that's one of the other reasons when you say, why do laws matter? One of them was that they tell us that we matter. So, because there's so much indication that we don't.
But people who are more for how do I want to put this? More for free speech or more ACLU than perhaps you're positioning yourself here today?
CCLA.
CCLA,
We do
sorry.
have one.
Quite right.
God bless
CCLA.
Alan Borovoy.
There you go.
Yes.
I think they would say hate speech laws don't give people the right to speak out. They clamp down on our ability to speak out, which is why I was somewhat confused about your choice of words there.
Frankly, asked backwards.
And I partially...
Is that a technical term?
I partially share Susan's position to the extent that I think that there's a really important distinction that people who feel aggrieved by particular forms of speech and turn to the law are, in essence, turning to the law not to limit speech, but to challenge the speech that has already been deployed. Mm-hmm. It's a very, very different thing than saying that they're turning to the law to limit the speech. The speech is already out there. They're turning to the law to challenge speech that they find injurious, that they find that has been deployed against them in a way that they believe is not representative of them as individuals or community and so on and so forth. So there's a very interesting and important distinction that I think needs to be made, that the law is not simply about shutting down speech.
I want to get Richard's take on this.
I better help out Janet briefly here anyway, because she's getting
I haven't broken down
increasingly...
yet.
No.
But
I want to be careful to think of law and legal process as a kind of vehicle to sort of vindicate people's sort of views and provide a kind of an opportunity to express oneself. I think, as I've already indicated, I think there's a place for law to deal with extreme speech. By the same token, it is a very crude and blunt instrument and not ideally suited.
But do you teach your students that hate speech laws, as Susan suggests, give people the right to speak out?
Of course
I don't frame it that way. No, not at all. And
if you're a natural rightist, it means we have it naturally, but we have it under the charter. That Susan's remark struck me in exactly the same way. As laws don't give us the right to speak out. We have that right.
The very presence of a law, however, indicates a kind of a public condemnation of certain kinds of behaviors. Yeah. And there's a place for that. And this can become a vehicle. Of course, the reverse argument holds that many people have made, Ernst Sundell being the principal example. It can provide a platform and a vehicle for an individual like that to
get free advertising every night on television for the length of the trial.
I don't actually think that is ultimately a true problem, but it cuts both ways.
Well, did you worry about that, Susan? In protesting against this movie 30 years ago that you thought was so hateful, which was hateful, did you realize you were giving them a lot of free publicity at the same time as well?
Oh, Marvin Miller, he was a happy guy. He was the guy who owned Cinema 2000 up near Dundas. But again, we made a choice. We said, okay, either we're going to just let it go and not say anything. And in fact, that demonstration galvanized a whole movement of feminists and violence against women, and in my view, was completely worth it. And we did more than that. We took pictures of guys going into the theater. We weren't messing around. I'll tell you.
Do you think more people saw the movie as a result of the attention you brought to it?
I actually don't think so, because I think we were outside, and I should be clear that the best part of that action was the protest. So, we were in action, and we did not make it easy for people to go into that theater.
Okay, let's not pussyfoot around here. Let's do a real honest-to-goodness example, stolen from the headlines of the last couple of months. One person in Newfoundland complained about one word in a song that's been getting radio play for 25 years. If you didn't hear about it, this is Mark Dire Straits' song, okay? MTV. The word faggot is in the song several times. Somebody complained about it. The regional office of the Broadcast Standards Council in the Maritimes heard the complaint, endorsed the complaint, and that song was banned for radio play because of the word faggot. And if they wanted to play it on the radio anymore, they had to beep that word out of it. What do we think? Jen?
I think that airbrushing history, the Stalinist approach, that you knock the guy off and then you airbrush all the pictures so you can't see him anymore, I think it's the wrong approach. I mean, I loved that song, absolutely loved that song. And yeah, the word faggot, but it's like changing the N-word from Huckleberry Finn. This was history. This is the way it was. I think that's a tempest in a teapot, an absurd sort of reaction to a non-problem.
Just in the, you're going to forgive me here.